Okay, it's not that bad. It's just a little, or a lot, underwhelming. Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles is essentially a recap game for the first half at least. Even when put into that context, recap isn't even the right word. It's like a recap of recaps. The story for the games is condensed down a lot. Then again, this game isn't meant to replace those games, and instead tries to serve as the story so far kind of thing. Starting you at Resident Evil 0, then 1, and 3, at least for the time being. Each of the main entry games have 3 stages, and you have to play through one in order to unlock the next. And the framing of the game is pretty cool at least. Setting it from Wesker's perspective as if he's going through some Umbrella files on each of these outbreaks.
Biohazard. The outbreak occurred in the summer of 1998. It started in the American Midwestern town of Raccoon City.
With Umbrella Chronicles being a Wii game and on-rail shooter, I had a few ideas how to tackle this title and the sequel. Emulation is the easy answer, obviously, but I still had a Wii around here somewhere and wanted a genuine experience. So I picked up both games, did some wrist exercises, and started back at 0. This one feels like the most complete package, ironically enough, covering most of the game's enemies, story beats, and even including the scene of Rebecca asking for a confession.
Billy, I'm sorry, but I have to know. Did you really kill 23 people?
Though a certain Centipede and Singing Man are missing. The voice actors from the previous titles aren't reprising their roles, aside from Wesker, which is a common thing Capcom does. Though, the voice actor who does Jill in this game would go on to voice her in 5, and was also the Pink Space Ranger. The gameplay here is what you would mostly expect from an on-rail shooter. You walk through some iconic locations and shoot at whatever comes at the screen, with a Resident Evil twist here and there. Before the start of every stage, you can choose a loadout. Your primary will always be a pistol that has infinite ammo, and your secondary is your choice of array of guns. These have limited ammo, and you do have to pick them up first in order to unlock them. You can carry more than 2 weapons, but it comes down to the level you're doing to have multiple options of guns. You can also bring someone along for this ride, if you feel like causing some irreparable damage. So I brought my brother Timmy along. Timmy! Unlike arcade games of the same nature, here you share 1 health bar. You can replenish damage done with the green herbs scattered around, but you can't insert quarters here to continue. For that, you need a first aid spray, and from all my time playing this game, the most you'll find is 1. You'll rarely need them unless playing at higher difficulties, as most stages are between 9 to 12 minutes, assuming your aim is pretty good. Most of the stages also include a checkpoint at the halfway mark, and the stage will end with a boss fight most of the time. 0 has you dealing with most of the bosses of that game: Giant Scorpion, Bat, Tyrant makes an appearance, and you end with the Queen Leech. The pacing here can feel a bit off at times, especially when you know the game. Just try not to think about it too hard. Some of the cutscenes here feel entirely remade, but some of them also feel taken right out of the GameCube. Story-wise, there is a lot cut out, but it's placed elsewhere, like Wesker being absent from the story alongside Birkin. That stuff got pushed into its own separate campaign of sorts, so we'll go over that after the mainline stuff. While 0 feels mostly the same, RE1 they took a lot of liberties with, and committed an egregious sin. There is no Barry in this game. Oh boy, but that isn't the worst thing they did. It feels like they chose Chris's side of the story, and when you think about it like that, it makes sense why Barry isn't here, as he also wasn't in that version. I just think there's a way to set stages up so it's Barry and Jill, Chris and Rebecca, and then finally end with Chris and Jill together so they take out Tyrant. If you were to play Resident Evil 1, it's a lot slower paced, but you can't have that kind of gameplay for this game, at least consistently. You can have a few moments here and there, but action is the focal point, so adding zombies coming from everywhere is actually beneficial, adding to the whole feeling of outnumbered and overwhelmed with zombies crawling from every location possible. Crimson Heads make a return. While not as terrifying as in Remake, something still running at you fast is a little unnerving. Lisa Trevor is cut from the main portion of the game for whatever reason. Instead, we get to enjoy this odd mashup of how things play out on the mansion. The first boss of stage 1 is Yawn, but not when you first run into Yawn, but the second, the fight over in the library. Richard is also technically alive, at least until we run into Rebecca again in the labs.
Rebecca, we're getting out of here.
All right. But the team...
She also has blood splattered all over her, an interesting design choice. Second stage is taking place all outside, running through the courtyard until we get a fork in the road. We can choose which path to take, go straight to the cabin or go through the caves. I don't know why this bothers me as much as it does, but when taking the cave way, we just run through the water. And I know that makes actual real life sense, but my Resident Evil mush brain is just not computing. Either route we take will result in a fight with Plant 42 at the cabin. This game also has QTEs, and and they're terrible. It's split into two categories, ones you can miss and take damage, and ones that if you miss are insta-kills. The insta-kill ones are some of the most annoying I've ever seen. This is also probably more of a two-player thing than a single-player thing, because you both need to hit the correct prompt in order to dodge. So if one of you mess up or press the wrong button, death. Sometimes you'll restart close to that cutscene, sometimes you'll start from the checkpoint, or you'll just restart at the beginning, depending on where that part is, and you can start seeing how tedious this can get. The obvious solution is just get good. My solution would be just to make it one prompt you both have to press instead of individual ones. Plant 42 is a lot more lively here than the actual game, constantly using Vine Whip and creating a frenzy. It's a pretty okay boss fight as far as things goes, but this scenario of the game has my biggest annoyance. Most of these levels consist of running around in a circle, aka padding, going through a lot of the same runs. The last stage is definitely the most noticeable, as the labs in general don't really have a lot of game time. We run to the elevator, oh, power's out, run all the way back to the power, then run all the way back to the elevator. I'm just not the biggest fan of how they did things here. However, seeing Tyrant in first person is pretty neat, and seeing it from this perspective really adds to this whole, this guy's pretty big.
For you.
We even see Wesker hit some baby blue on the side. The stage ends with the rooftop tyrant fight, but in both instances, he's a complete pushover. Now, gather in and come close, cause I have a working theory, and it's pretty simple. Here's how it goes. Outside of Nemesis, I think Capcom hates Resident Evil 3. Now, I have no real proof of this, except for the fact that every time Resident Evil 3 is remade in some fashion, it's always butchered. I was really looking forward to this section, because I really do love RE3. Then I started it, and all I could do was go, huh, I've seen that before. My brother was the first to mention it, but he was like, hey, isn't that the street from Outbreak? I thought it looked familiar, and then everything came together. The first stage is Outbreak. Cool, that's a nice little way to mesh titles together. The second stage is also Outbreak. And, oh boy, you won't believe it, the third stage is also Outbreak. Now, the third stage is just the RPD, just the version from Outbreak File 2, but I wanted RE3. I wanted the shopping outlets, City Park, gas station, the bar, running into Brad, the clock tower, and the factory. Instead, I get Outbreak File 2 with Jill and Carlos skins for Kevin and Cindy. I said it right that time, right guys? At the very least, they gave us the warm. Couldn't get that in the remake. Carlos also doesn't sound Latin. Now, I'm not sure if he was supposed to, or that's just what they went with in the original, but I don't like this.
We've got to get out of here. A rescue chopper's on its way. Come with me.
The stages are also done just terribly. The first stage ends with a worm fight, and the second just ends with a hallway of gremlins. It isn't until the final stage that Nemesis shows up. Why? He's an important character who chases us down in the game, and you even have the perfect scenario for it to be his 3 stages. Starting with normal Nemesis at stage 1, then tentacle Nemesis at stage 2, and finally ending with the blob with the final level. But instead, we somehow mess up his iconic line. Why does he have autotune? How does a game that's complete ass accomplish a better version of Nemesis than something more modern? He doesn't even belong in Code Veronica and they got him to work there. It was at this point I realized these first 3 sections of the game were a lazy cash grab, reusing assets and character models of the most recently released titles. You wanna know what the worst part is? It's not like they couldn't do a well done sequence of being chased around, as we'll soon see later, it's that they just didn't want to. Umbrella Chronicles so far isn't anything special. I mean, at this point, a remake of Survivor would have been better, or at the very least a scenario of Ark Thompson. Okay, let's talk about some bonus stuff. When I hear the name Umbrella Chronicles, this is more what I think of. Short stories from a certain character's perspective during the mainline game it takes place in. Seeing what Wesker was up to during Resident Evil 0, Rebecca's adventures in the mansion, or even the surprising Ada appearance. This is all a welcome change of pace, and what really should have been the game's main content instead of subchapters. While this game is a Wesker-driven game, it should have been even more so. Imagine a full campaign of Wesker's POV during Resident Evil 1, 0, and even Code Veronica. That would have been fun content to have seen instead of condensing down the storylines of old games. The Wesker chapters of Zero have us running backwards to regroup with the STARS team and set in motion the plot of the first game. These chapters can be brutal, they're a lot harder than anything in the main part of the game, and they are single player only, but you can unlock co-op for them if you beat a certain chapter. That to me was kind of redundant. Why go through all these chapters and unlock co-op just to go through them again? This game has a heavy emphasis on co-op, so why not just make these chapters co-op from the get-go? Most of the info drops from these chapters we already know, but they mostly serve as setup for this character. It bugs me a little when games and stories do this with no real build-up or foreshadowing, just that, oh, this guy was actually here too and is behind some of the things from the very beginning. It feels like a cheap way to add a character, or make him fit for this game as he'll be a main part of the story in the future. He also brought Mr. X along, or at least I thought so. I was kinda geeked, and then I got a clearer picture. What did they do to you? I can't stand this boss fight for a lot of reasons. One, motion controls can be very hit or miss. Sometimes it feels accurate and good, other times it feels completely off and just bad. Also, it just kinda hurts your wrist after playing for so long, so extended sessions can take a little toll. Two, this boss fight is more of a mechanical fight and finding a rhythm, making it feel like a dance and less like a fight, meaning the same things will always happen and it just loops. He'll dash at you and you need to interrupt it in order to not get hit, and then get a few shots in before dodging via QTEs. Rinse and repeat. So far, this is the only boss fight that's asks of you, and overall the second in the game to do this style of fight. It's also the only stage in the game that felt like you needed to have a decent loadout, aka a strong second gun, as your pistol feels useless against him. The boss arena even has a rocket launcher in the back for you to grab, kind of hinting that explosives might be pretty good against this guy, but me, I'm stubborn. I figured all I needed was a first aid spray for continue and I could beat him. Well, I eventually gave in. I mean, I tried a different couple loadouts before eventually grabbing the strongest rockets I had and saved all my grenades to just dump it all on the guy. Krauser's brother drops his line about Talos, setting up a plot point for the future, but more importantly, Rebecca sleeps with that Glock by her side. 100% understandable given the circumstances, but it's just too funny. Rebecca's chapters start with her having this nightmare about a giant snake who we know is Yawn, but to her it's just a monster. Richard is also here accompanying her throughout, which adds a lot to their relationship and more to the reason why Rebecca was so beat up about his death. He seems to be the first person she runs into at the mansion. Gameplay wise, the chapters themselves are just more mansion, running from the courtyard back to the main part of the mansion, so almost exactly like how Wesker's chapters were going backwards too. Her final chapter does end with a fight with Yawn. That's a decent chase down into the library, setting up the events right before Jill and Chris arrive, even answering my question to why Rebecca was covered in blood. Oh hey, that scene's back. The next two Wesker-focused chapters take place after he was killed. This scene here is incredibly important and will play a major role in this game's ending.
Wesker, Albert. I am afraid that as of 2400 hours, I have taken it upon my authority to revoke your access privileges to the mainframe system.
Impossible. Who are you?
I am Red Queen. My secondary mission objective.
You will
is the
regret this,
protection
my lady.
of-
Okay, now give us the glowing red eyes thing. You would think with Wesker being infected would change things up gameplay wise, but they wouldn't think of that until RE6. Yet again, we're running back from the end point to the beginning point, in this case from the labs to the beginning of the mansion. But before we get there, what about some fanfare? While I'm happy to see Lisa, and sure there can be a reason why she's here, it just kinda undermines her ending in the original game. Now, is this game even canon story-wise? Yes and no. The retelling of the main story seems to be not canon, but all this side stuff kind of seems like it is canon, so take it as you will. Do you want to know what the worst part is? They do a great chase sequence with Lisa Trevor here as the final stage. Something they could have easily done with Nemesis. I'm still not over it. Everything so far has been looking okay, so let's see some questionable stuff. This Ada chapter is confusing timeline-wise. This seems to be the way Ada escapes Raccoon City, but she was underground, like far underground in the lab, and now she's back in the city? I know I shouldn't think too hard about it, but I just can't help it, you know? Ada though looks great, at least design-wise. In game, she's definitely seen better days. The design just strikes me as very Silent Hill-ish, which I love. Also, the fact that you start the chapter in caution is a nice little detail. What's not is that we're once again reusing Outbreak assets, running down the sewer and ending back in a familiar location. We do get what seems to be Ada and Wesker's first meeting, and get to thank Wesker for the hookshot gun. But here we get to see the developers just be lazy, adding in the mutated Mr. X from Outbreak File 2. Again, why? Ada escapes Raccoon City in the most Ada way possible.
You can have it.
Our final chapter involving Raccoon City is dedicated to the fourth survivor, who I'm pretty sure I never mentioned in the RE2 video I did. Sorry, Hunk. This chapter, like the previous, is all about the character's escape from Raccoon City. We won't be starting in the sewers like the original game mode. Instead, we'll be in the basement of the RPD, needing to make our way to the rooftop for extraction. In typical Hunk fashion, this chapter is harder due to having more enemies on screen, dealing with a wide variety of enemies. Dogs, zombies, those plants from RE2, and spiders. It's short and sweet, and ends with a face-off of hunters as opposed to Mr. X. There is this cool final shot of Raccoon City through Hunk's lenses. And with that, we're all caught up on past events. Only thing left is the last chunk of Umbrella Chronicles that's all about the present day, or right before RE4. This section of the game is all about the downfall of Umbrella, you know, how they got off screen in Resident Evil 4. Well, this covers that. Jill and Chris are reunited as they hear about rumors of a secret Umbrella facility in Russia. Where there's smoke, there's typically a fire. So, hunters are just running wild in the snow. First off, thankfully this isn't just Outbreak assets reused again. Instead, the environment looks solid and the winter setting is a different pace for Resident Evil. Running down these dark hallways with only our lights as a source, and glaring red lights signaling trouble, sets the mood for a moody atmosphere for the first stage. We'll head deeper into the Umbrella labs using an elevator that resembles the Umbrella logo. As we head deeper into the Umbrella facility, we'll go through a roller coaster of environments that'll make you question just how big this place is. A decontamination shower, a fancy lab setting, clean looking hallways, some sharks for some reason, a dark factory with fire, and some more movie laser references. I'm starting to get the feeling that Capcom kinda liked that movie, though this laser sequence is pretty weak when compared to Leon's. One more elevator ride down featuring all our favorite BOWs, except the monkeys and the hunters. I hate those guys. It's a pretty quick run through, but I do like the sequence of choosing our own path, shooting whichever door you want to unlock and go through. Jill and Chris do some action running, and I told you this guy was gonna come back.
The latest in the Umbrella's product line. Codename Talos. A pinnacle of biological weapons, all controlled by the Red Queen computer. The ultimate weapon.
Now we have to fight a Digimon. Running behind cover, shooting at the missiles, and the thing's armor so that it breaks off. Nothing noteworthy, and I won't say this design is bad, it just feels like it's not for this game or franchise. Resident Evil is way more body horror, a grotesque mixture of body parts and organs spilling out with glowing red things sticking out. Oh, kinda like that. I honestly expected this to happen a lot more than it did. I was really surprised this was the only second stage boss in the entire game. I guess the Queen Leech does count, but still. This is the second of those mechanical fights I was mentioning earlier, where you need to find a good rhythm in the fight. Needing to blow up those 3 glowing red spots on his body to expose his weak spot, but you only get a little bit of time to shoot at him before he does one of two things: shooting lasers at you, or tentacles with debris thrown at you. After that, you have another small window to blow up those spots. The lasers seem to be the easiest ones to do, as all it requires is the right button timing, but this just falls in line with what I was saying earlier about 2 players. Because if one misses, we both take damage. While it can be a bit frustrating fighting the same boss over and over and over for 20 minutes, finally beating him left me quite satisfied. Somehow this brings upon the end of Umbrella, but Chris still finds himself thinking about Wesker.
He's still out there.
This line about power is a really good line though.
The only thing that can defeat power is more power.
The story isn't over yet though. I mean, it is a Wesker-driven narrative, you should know, it's all about him. Did you think Jill and Chris just happened upon the facility and Wesker just wasn't involved? Wesker needs these two to cause a little distraction for him as he heads in first, and that he's reciprocating Chris's longing.
Chris, It appears our fates are forever intertwined.
Here we get more of that Code Veronica Wesker just doing the craziest things, like shoving this gate open or doing these insane jumps. And for whatever reason, he has a silencer on him like this is a Spec Ops mission. Plus the sound it makes is funny. We go from these overtly loud gunshots to pew pew pew. The bat from Zero is here for some reason, and that goober from the second Wesker mission, but now there's two. Little did he know, I also brought my brother, so this was a cakewalk. Though, there is some Dragon Ball Z shit going on here though. After taking Twiddle Dee and Dumb out, we have one more guy to take care of, cause he's not in 5. Wesker shows off some more superhuman abilities by jumping again, and we get to see all the damage Jill and Chris caused, creating some nice environments. Unlike those two, we'll be taking the upper path, bringing us face to face with this guy again. Also, the Red Queen, which is definitely a shout out to the movie, as this is the only appearance of it. Though, according to this game, it's been with us since the very first outbreak, if you choose to believe. If you choose to believe. This guy decides to transform and, not the strongest of final boss designs. In fact, some may say it's pretty weak looking. So weak looking, he goes down in a blink of an eye. Wesker gets his revenge on the Red Queen, erasing the memory and taking all of Umbrella's data for himself, so he can restart and be the real Umbrella. Wesker shows Ada how it's done, and Wesker ends up in the chair we see him in RE4. Also sets the very first cutscene of the game in perspective. Basically, Wesker's just watching home movies. Umbrella Chronicles is not good. It's not that it's not even good, it's just really not worth your time. I'm sure there's some nostalgia here for people, but this game lacks an identity. It tries really hard to be both a recap and short stories, and doesn't really excel at either. The behind the scenes moments are good, but they're short-lived with nothing really to add besides flavor text to most. It feels like they try to make a game out of reused assets without any creativity. That's not to say reused assets equals no creativity, because you can very well make a good game out of reused assets, Majora's Mask, Resident Evil 3 to name a few. Then you hide some of the chapters behind being unlockable. Don't get me wrong, I love unlocking things, but in order to get some of the parts of the game unlocked, you need to get an A ranking on certain chapters. That means getting really good at aiming and finding all the files. So there is some game time here, but I just don't think it's enjoyable, and is honestly the second game so far in the franchise that I would say just don't play. Hopefully the sequel's better. Darkside Chronicles is pretty good. While there isn't much change in the way gameplay is handled, it feels better. Shooting feels responsive and good. Green herbs now work in a similar way to the mainline games, meaning you can pick them up and use them whenever you're low on health, as opposed to Umbrella Chronicles where you would heal automatically once picking it up. You also have an actual loadout this time around, consisting of your choice of 4 weapons, and you can change it on the fly by pausing the game. These weapons are also upgradable like in the last game, but instead of earning stars as a purchasing power, here we jump back to the way RE4 did things, and we collect money throughout the levels to use. The health bar system is also changed, no longer sharing a single health bar and instead having 2 separate health bars. But that's not entirely the truth. While the health bars are separated, if one of you dies, it's still a game over. So it feels more like a cosmetic change because it still functions as one life overall. Graphically, the game is a huge step up from Umbrella Chronicles as the models are brand new for this game. The only real downside being that the Wii only outputs to 480p. Not being able to see these models in a true HD setting is heartbreaking, but there are some alternatives like the PS3 version or emulation again. But we're strictly talking about the original Wii version for this video. At the end of the day, it's still an on-rail shooter, so the gameplay isn't going to change too much. But there is one thing that really turns off people for this game. One big thing during development of this game that they wanted to get across was a bigger emphasis on horror and to have the camera match the feeling of you actually being there. So this game has really bad shaky cam. Darkside Chronicles released on November 17th, 2009. Around this time, found footage movies were also really taking off and would become a staple in horror with the releases of Paranormal Activity and Wreck, just to name a few. Now, I don't think these movies had an effect on the direction of this game due to the release date of those movies and with the way game development works. I just find it interesting that everyone around this time just collectively thinking, wouldn't this be cool? Darkside Chronicles camera just straight up sucks majority of the time. There's this constant head bobbing going on, making the camera swing, and especially so during boss fights. Aiming can go from feeling pretty accurate to just downright undoable. Take this boss fight in the RE2 section where you have to land headshots on Mr. X, and it can be a bit frustrating. It doesn't help that it feels a bit rougher to pick up items when looking around. This problem was alleviated in the previous game as you can move the camera around a little with the joystick. In this game, the joystick functions as a weapon swap, so we have zero control over the camera in this game. Darkside Chronicles also chugs quite a bit. Frame drop is very noticeable in this game, and there was some moments in Umbrella Chronicles, but here it feels like it happens a lot more often. Motion blur is extremely noticeable in this game, alongside a lot of jaggies. On the other side of things, the story is pretty good, serving as another retelling of the only other two games missing from Umbrella Chronicles, but also as a prequel to Resident Evil 4, showing us what went down with Leon and Krauser, and even bringing back the respective voice actors for each.
But to him, after all he's been through, BOWs, cryptid, they're all the same.
Our guide is in the village up ahead.
As a side note, both Claire and Ada's voice actors are also back, alongside two new voice actors for Steve and kinda Chris. We'll save that for the Code Veronica section. The game begins somewhere in South America, where we get some not so subtle foreshadowing. Krauser comes across as if BOWs and Santa Claus are the same thing.
So, you think BOWs actually exist?
Their mission consists of locating a man named Javier, as he recently came in contact with the former Umbrella scientist and has since gone missing. The first chapter of Operation Javier has a strong atmosphere that resembles something between Resident Evil 4 and 5. We have missing girls and infected villagers, so we should feel right at home. The biggest difference being we're back to zombies. And the zombie designs here are as solid as always, the typical villagers and even Javier's own men. Leon and Krauser will finally find their guide, and he'll put us on track to the plot.
That girl.
We'll find the girl down in the church singing. Not creepy at all.
Sleep, my love, as the trees above protect you from the dark.
She'll pass out, and we're left to fight the boss. Boss fights in this game are okay. For the most part, these fights aren't too frustrating. Krauser wants some answers, and this is how the game sets the retelling of the previous games. They're flashbacks, starting with...
Alright, let me go back to the beginning. My fight against bio-warfare all started in a zombie-infested ghost town. It was September 1998, my first and only day as a police officer.
This is probably the closest thing we'll ever see to the original game being remade pound for pound. This is also just a really good adaptation of Resident Evil 2. For the most part, everything is here. We don't get the diner scene, but they keep the iconic shot of Leon aiming at Claire, and she even one-ups him.
Move!
Not bad.
Kendo gets mauled, we run through the back streets, the basketball court, the apartment stairs, all to get the money shot of the RPD. All the iconic locations are here, even Marvin.
Who the hell are you?
The best part is, no outbreak. Bliss. While the camera can be a bit annoying during shootouts, these more quieter moments like walking down a bloody RPD hallway are sublime. Resident Evil 2 story had two main characters in Leon and Claire, which split into an A and B scenario that had different events and even different bosses. Now, they could have gone the way of Resident Evil 1 in Umbrella Chronicles and choose one side of the story to tell, but instead they combined it and created essentially a mix of both scenarios, having both Mr. X and William appear where they normally would, Mr. X in the hallway and William in the sewer, even including every single boss fight from the original game. The gross baby that pops out of the chief, William's first encounter, the alligator, which includes the same way you beat him in the original game, Mr. X down in the labs, the greatest hits featuring every single one of William's transformations. Beautiful. The final fight with Mr. X, which has my favorite line of all time now, and use this. And topping the final stage off with William as a blob. It's all here. Alongside that, we even get some fun character interactions we've never seen before, such as Claire meeting Ada. In this version of the game, Leon very clearly has a crush on Ada. Claire has some concerns about Ada, but he dashes those away quickly.
Wait, Leon. If she did come through here, why would she go alone? There's something about her that bothers me.
She just wants to get out of here, Claire, and she needs our help.
Men.
When we run into her again, she says goodbye, and Leon's just like, as long as he makes it out okay. Then he gets shot. Sherry's mom tries to tell us about the virus, but it's really hard to hear her. Good thing we can read.
It conforms a living thing and rapidly evolves into transcendental levels. A boon for these modern times.
Hunk is name dropped finally. And Ada doesn't die to Mr. X. Instead, the last time we see her was back in the sewer. Though it is actually hilarious when Ada throws down the rocket launcher, Leon is just so excited.
Leon, we need to take him out first.
Even after killing the tyrant, Leon's still looking around. The ending here makes the most sense to the overall story canon, with the whole reasoning why Leon even became an agent in the first place.
And Sherry and I were rescued by US government agents.
We have the authority to do as we please with you. You and that girl.
Just leave her out of this. She's an innocent.
An innocent who carries the G antibody. Don't worry. We're taking very good care of her. Bottom line is, you have the experience we're looking for. So if you want this to end peacefully, you really have only one choice. Work for us.
Also, I love that Sherry's just like, yeah, my mom was a piece of...
No, that's a lie. Mommy never...
Now that Krauser's caught up on some of the lore, we can jump to the second stage of Operation Javier. The girl wakes up, and they just keep calling her the girl.
That girl.
You're the girl. They haven't told us your name yet.
Manuela.
There we go. Krauser, Leon, and Manuela are making their way back to Javier's mansion using a waterway as the way. Though the girl does seem a little off, but she does know her way around, making her a useful guide. After making the workers take a break, we'll come face to face with Javier, adding some more questions to Manuela.
You need only to follow my directions for 15 years. This will prevent the transformation. But please, my dear, you must be patient.
What the?
The man who gave us the Veronica virus told me it would work.
So...
I feel like this year may be special. Don't you, Alexia? It's almost like there's something I'm forgetting.
My dear Alfred, please be easy on yourself. Why don't you set down your burdens and play a game with me?
You're right, Alexia. Since you've come back, I've never been this happy.
Personally, this is my favorite Resident Evil title, and trust me, I see the comments, a lot of you seem not to like this game. Which is perfectly fair. Code Veronica has a lot of faults, including this guy right here. Now, Steve in the original game comes across extremely whiny.
Wait, don't shoot! Sorry about that. Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry.
The voice actor for Steve here does a good job of sounding similar, but less whiny, except now he sounds like an anime character.
Damn, girl. You scared me.
Eyes forward.
My name's Steve. You don't look like one of them, Claire.
Steve already had a good amount of screen time in that game, and even more here. This is also the second time now that Code Veronica has been put into a light gun game, just taking notes. Kind of weird that happens sometimes. Just like the RE2 retelling, this is the full game, except not fully. We still go around all the locations, bosses, etc., but we do have cut content this time. Rodrigo is missing, and Chris's visit to the prison and arrival to Antarctica is entirely cut. Instead, the game cuts to when Chris wakes up Claire and cuts back the screen time of Wesker to something closer to the Dreamcast version of the game. Oh, but Steve staring at Claire's butt is still here. They did cut out Steve trying to kiss a sleeping Claire though, so we'll take our win.
Okay, now we get the hell off this damn island.
Never mind. They also decided to change Alexia for some reason. Alexia and Alfred's relationship is weird. She sees herself as the queen of it all, and Alfred agrees. She does see Alfred as someone under her, or in her words, a worker ant, but an important one. But I always still had this feeling that she loved her brother dearly from the cutscenes, especially when he awakes her. She kills him in this game. Instead of coming across as a sadistic villain, she's very much a mustache-twirling one here. A change I'm not the biggest fan of. Also, I miss Alfred's original voice actor. Don't get me wrong, this one is done well, but Alfred's original just has this camp to him I genuinely like.
What? No!
This section of the game also does a lot of running around the same locations, cutting out the submarine section of the game as well as the more dungeon area below. The major plot points are still here: Claire looking for Chris, Steve being a prisoner and having to kill his dad, Alfred wearing wigs, daddy issues, Alexia awakening, but the Antarctica section is trimmed down to basically the final lap of the game. I would have liked to have seen Chris's reaction to walking around the mansion and having a bit of deja vu. Instead, we jump straight into the fight with Steve and go fight Alexia to end the retelling. During Steve's death, we get a POV shot of Wesker stalking, which is just kind of funny. Oh, and the snow. Think about it. Wesker actually took his time with his knife to carve this out. All that's missing is Nelson's laugh. That's quite a bit of story cuts, but they did flesh out Alfred's interactions. In the original game, Alfred makes a mention of his funhouse, and it's not really much. This game he does the same, but we see the twisted training he puts the soldiers through. It ends up feeling like a saw maze. It's a nice touch and shows off his sadistic side. So I gotta talk about Chris here. But don't worry, it's just a little bit. He has a whole video dedicated to him soon. Chris is voiced by the gentleman who voices him in 5, and I like his 5 voice. But it just feels a little wrong. When I hear this...
Look, Claire, we can talk about this later, but we gotta get out of here first.
I think of Hulk Chris, not Banner Chris. But it would make sense he probably did both RE5 and this game at the same time, as RE5 did release the same year. Which means I broke my rule. I want to do this series in release date order, but it just made a lot of sense to do both these titles together. I gotta throw nubs in here at some point, so here you go. Alexia's boss fight bothers me a little, because I think fighting human form Alexia in the mansion scattered with fire is a good fight. Instead, we have that squeezed in at the final fight, fighting all 3 forms. And I know I was just praising the Birkin fight for doing the same exact thing, but I think we could have had the Alexia fight at the beginning of this stage because we do start there. I think it's just a missed opportunity. Wesker securing Steve's body and thus the Veronica virus is actually a crucial plot point because of it being the Veronica virus back in... The last chunk of the game is dedicated to Leon and Krauser's story, picking up from the reveal that Manuela is Javier's daughter and more than likely infected with the Veronica virus. However, this stage is just a rehash of stage 3, running through the same waterways, except we'll end up outside this time. And I gotta say, despite it being a Wii game, this scenery isn't too bad. Good job. We have a new enemy here who strongly resembles Steve when he was looking a little green. After that, Krauser thinks the girl should be whacked, but Leon thinks there's a possible way to save her. Leon shows off his new iPhone, and Krauser reminds us of his patriotic stance.
Like you, I'm American.
Bringing us finally to Javier's mansion. This is also technically the actual final stage of the game, as the one after this one is strictly just a boss fight. We get a full house tour going through a prison, a fleshy red prison, the patio, and visit the outside garden. Find our umbrella researcher, but I have no idea where he is on screen. Can you find him? We then end up underground in a little makeshift lab and get a couple reveals. The biggest one being that those missing girls were used to keep Manuela alive, replacing her organs ever so often, at least for the first 15 years. The first boss we fought shows up for her final showdown, and turns out it's actually Manuela's mom. Pro tip, if you're a parent in the Resident Evil franchise, it does not look good for you. I also don't think this scene is as touching as they think it is. It just looks wrong. Javier does what every great Resident Evil villain does and fuses with the virus. Our last stage is essentially one long boss fight, starting with whatever this plant bulb thing is. Oh yeah, Krauser got this long needle thing shot at his arm, so rip. We run through some hallways to make our way outside to see the new Javier. He kind of looks like a bird, and I thought the Veronica virus was a bit more bug-like, but I guess. The first stage of this fight is just shooting at him until Krauser has a panic attack. Manuela has a breakthrough and would rather die a human than live to be whatever that is. Leon's too much of a good guy to let that happen, so he saves her from the impending smash. By being brave, Leon now has access to the Crest of Courage, giving Manuela the strength to digivolve. With access to her new power, we can finally bring down Javier. Pepper breath! Just gotta attack these 2 joints, and I hate this part. This is a cycle fight where we only get a certain amount of time to shoot at the joint before things start to happen. This little mine minigame, then dodging the leg, shooting a spear tentacle thing, and finally dodging a spear again. Rinse and repeat until you finish off both joints. After that, you'll finally come back to the head and can shoot at Javier until he asks you to put him down for good. Getting the final shot off is actually extremely satisfying. His body starts to burn and we end up in a helicopter. Krauser with his broken arm and Leon comforting Manuela in her dying moments as she casts a fireball without mana too many times. As Manuela starts to glow, her embers start to spark up, only leaving a faint trail and a butterfly flying in the distance, bringing everything full circle to the very first cutscene. Leon has a strong send-off.
Was it something genetic? Or was she sustained by this land that's so rich with life? The virus continues to grow, altering its form, strengthening perpetually, until the day it can be destroyed. In our bodies, in our souls.
And this is the bad ending. At the time, I didn't know this game had 2 endings, and in actuality, it has 3. There's technically 2 more stages of Operation Javier to play through to get the true ending. But in order to unlock those stages, you have to be fast, and it all revolves around the final fight. Leon has a line here making mention of Manuela losing too much blood. That should be your hint, as well as in the ending when she herself mentions her blood loss.
I'm losing too much blood.
And if that wasn't enough, you get this reminder at the end. The main goal here is to beat the Javier boss fight in under 10 minutes. The first part of the fight doesn't matter all that much, it's more about the joint segments after. You want to aim for about 2 rotations to finish, and the only real way to do that is to use a strong gun. This is where the game becomes tedious, because if you didn't know about this, there's a chance you already used all your ammo across the game. That means going back to previous stages to pick up ammo, and then trying to finish the fight again. However, ammo isn't just the solution either, because if your weapon doesn't do damage, then you can still end up taking a long time. So it's time to upgrade. Luckily, this doesn't seem to be as bad, as repeating the final level does give a decent amount of money. After farming a bit, I personally replayed stage 7 of the RE2 section as it gets a little of everything. We can finally see the canon ending, where Manuela actually lives and Leon comforts her in the fact that she now has to live with the virus. A couple of where are they now?
Manuela was later taken into custody by the US government. She was put under strict surveillance, but so far there have been no reports of any changes to her body. Krauser's arm never fully healed, and he was forced to leave the army. Where he went, no one knows.
And the same ending VO from earlier, and with this completed, we can now play the final 2 stages of Operation Javier. What could these stages be? Maybe we play as Wesker, or Krauser looking for Wesker. No, it's the same 2 levels you just played, except now it's told from Krauser's point of view. I hate this. I love seeing another character's perspective of events. It's a fun way to add things. Here, it just feels incredibly lazy. Nothing changes gameplay-wise, no new enemies or even new information. We already know Krauser ends up with Wesker because of power. And sure, it is cool to see Krauser slowly make himself believe the virus is the right way to go, but in previous games when we played as a new character, those characters would often have gameplay changes. Whether it was a new set of weapons, or finding out new information, or even new bosses. This is still an on-rail shooter, just made even worse by having to play alone. And these games are no fun solo. In fact, they can be quite frustrating. A lot of enemy encounters feel like they were designed with 2 players in mind, so not having any extra help feels annoying. My brother played through the first Krauser stage and got fed up at 3 points. With these bird skeletons, Steve's twins, and the boss of stage 4. Then you get back to the final fight, and it's tedious. I feel like this fight is 100% doable with a pistol, but it would just take forever because you're solo. So then it's back to playing RE2 to grab more ammo, and then you can do the fight. Now, I know what you're saying. The ending has got to be worth it, right? What new information is there? We get this cursed shot of Wesker with no glasses. And instead of Leon monologuing, Krauser gets a few words in.
You're cruel, Leon. Couldn't you make her feel proud? She has a whole new life ahead of her. There's nothing left to say. For you and I, Leon, we're merely different sides of the same coin.
End credits. So you know what? I take it back. This game and Umbrella Chronicles are both trash and deserve to be thrown away.
Disclaimer.
I don't actually believe Darkside Chronicles is that bad. It should be thrown away into the trash. That's more just being upset that the ending is pretty bad instead. Umbrella Chronicles for sure is a waste of time and is better off being watched as a YouTube video or reading the wiki. Darkside Chronicles is good, and if you can score it for a relatively cheap price, it's at least worth playing through once, but maybe not the Krauser sections, as those definitely suck. Resident Evil 5 videos being worked on will be the next time you see me more than likely. No games were actually thrown away and all performed by a professional stuntman. Drink responsibly.
All right. You ready to go? I'm ready. You ready? Let's go.
Oh, you like this shit? Yeah. Homeland, which turned into Domeland. Me and I'm getting dome on a daily. Timmy Tim, the next Slim Shady. Leaf, that is my girl. Refer to her as my Haley. Timmy!